Parkersburg, and if they let you in, you would love to see the basilica up there. We just went up on Sunday. It is absolutely beautiful. It doesn't go back to this period, but it goes back to World War I. And they brought over during World War I. The lady told us the stained glass and the paintings, and that was difficult to do because of the war going on with the Germans when they were building that. But it's the Basilica of Saint Mary, Mary of the Assumption. I think I'm getting it right. It is the name of the church up there. And so they've got their records in Steubenville Diocese, which I contacted, and we want to know about Thomas's first wife. She and Thomas, the family, told us, came over from Ireland, met over here, and they came over in the 1830s, met over here, got married in Connecticut, and then they made their way to Guyandotte, and they purchased this house. Now, because there was no church, and I'm pretty sure they were members of the one in Marietta, but it's hard to get to Marietta, they got a circuit rider, and his name was Thomas Quirk. And this circuit rider even lived in this house with them. Later, he was the priest over this parish, and there's a painting back here of the church that was in Guyandotte was built. He also founded a church in Huntington, and this was about 1873, that sat at 20th Street and 7th Avenue, is where that church, before St. Joe, that he built. And he lived here with the Carrolls for about 10 years, and so did a couple others.
Was this when the Catholic cemetery was created?
Yeah, there was
a
back here.
Cemetery here.
That's picture, that church shows the graveyard.
Oh, okay.
That's
part of the church.
And when that church didn't seem to last very long, we haven't got a real good history on it. It supposedly fell in disrepair. See, when Huntington started, a lot of population came in, and that church took over, because a lot of Catholics moved to Huntington. And so that church survived and did real well. This one didn't. And so when the Carrolls in the 1940s, Madie Carroll moved her family to Spring Hill, to the section of Spring Hill that is for Catholics. So they then moved there. But the one we're missing is the one I was going to tell you about. He married her in 1843 in Connecticut. Her name was Annie Burns. And like I said, we don't know. There was no birth and death records until about 1856 in Virginia. So she died in January of 1854. So there was no record unless it's a church record, which we were looking for now on her death. So we went to Marietta hoping they could tell us if we went to the Basilica and go in. But the secretary wasn't there, and when I called her yesterday, she said their records didn't go back that far, so she gave me the diocese in Steubenville, and their archivist is looking for things. We found the cemetery, but not her stone, but there is a section of that cemetery, St. Mary's Cemetery in Marietta, that has some 1850 deaths in it, stones from that era, so it's very possible. I believe that if the family, she'd have been married and they had taken a section of this little Guyandotte cemetery and, blessed it, I believe that the family would have known she was over there. But the family doesn't know where she's at. So we're now trying to find out more. We do know he and his second wife got married in June of 1855 at the Marietta Church. So that they came here and they needed to make a living, of course. And so they went and got a license to operate an ordinary. And an ordinary is just like a little tavern, and you could rent spaces out in the bed like an inn. So they kind of turned it into that. The James River Canal Turnpike terminus was Guyandotte. So people coming in from the East Coast, particularly Tidewater, Virginia, Maryland, DC, and all of those, they had to come through here because the other national road went out at Wheeling and went across from the more northern. And then by then there was a road for Parkersburg, a railroad, the B&O was being built before the war, and you could come out at Parkersburg. But a lot of people came this way, stayed in Guyandotte to get on those steamboats to go west. And it went right by this house. And if the Ohio River, there were no dams on it yet, so if it was low, they might be stuck in Guyandotte for, a month, before they could go any further. So you'll find a lot of people in Guyandotte got got these ordinary licenses, and they made a little extra money by renting out, spaces in the bed. We found under here, because the house was deteriorated really bad, so we took 3 foot of dirt out from under here, and of course we're crazy, so we sifted it. And we got a contractor to put the block under it, and then put it back. But so we found a lot of pieces of what, and they mark out there, the galleries, they've got those little green flasks that are Irish green for the most part of them, and they're just about this thick, and about like that. So maybe they offered some good Irish whiskey. And that might have been what was going on. But across the but across the hall from right after they got here, probably 1853 to 1873, when these churches were built, they had mass in their parlor. And I have a picture so that you all can see. After the 37 flood, there was an extra door that was in that corner for this tavern. And the reason being that if the lady of the house received guests and children going back and forth, they could not go through the door that people who might be abiding a little bit could go in and out of. It just wasn't properly done that way. So if you did actually have a little tavern area where they could get some liquor, and that ordinary license allowed you to have liquor, then you would be going in and out a separate door instead of the main door to the house. And this is the Carrolls. It looks just like the front door that we have, so they would have been the ones, who would put it in. The bar was supposed to be along that wall, and we're fortunate that one of the Carrolls, descendants of, he's a great nephew to Madie, is going to give us some funding to put the bar back, so we have to get an idea on what it looked like and see what Chandlers might, build it for us, so we can set this room back up as it was. We're not opening that up. We've already got enough doors in this house. But, we have an artist. I don't know if you've seen her work, Debbie Richardson, and she's on our board. And so we've got her going to do some kind of like a 3-dimensional picture of that corner with the door, so we can put that there, so we can still tell the story about this door. I'll say one more thing about the tavern before I move on to where the Civil War actions that occurred there. C.P. Huntington, after the war, bought the C&O, and I'm sure you all know that. He came to Guyandotte, which was supposed to be the terminus for the railroad, because all that was started before the war, and they didn't even get the tracks laid, but they laid the bed for the tracks to Barboursville already, before when the war started. So whenever he came here and got a drink. And in the history of, it's a biography of C.P. that was published right after his death. Supposedly his horse came untethered, and they did something on the sidewalk, who knows, but the sheriff gave him a $5 ticket. Now, that's a lot of money. So instead of a chief of police, they had sheriffs in towns back then, like we got in the county. So this sheriff gives him this ticket, and he gives him a $5 gold piece and said, Guyandotte's no longer going to be the terminus for my railroad. So it is true that he did build the depot that the Guyandotte residents had to use. And see, they're still a separate town. They're not part of Huntington until 1911. And this is about 71 that the railroad was built on that side of the river. So they had to walk the trestle to get to their depot. And there is an article that I located that whenever they did the B&O came through in the 1890s, there's an article that says we finally get our own depot. And so I thought that was kind of cute, because they should have had a depot. Matter of fact, Huntington should have had more than one, but they put Guyandotte's on. So maybe the story is true, and he really was mad at Guyandotte. I think he wanted already to buy the lots up, the farms, and build a city here, because he couldn't make any money off of Guyandotte. He wanted to sell to the railroad, which he did. He bought 11 farms. And he wanted to sell to people, so he set up a land company, and he wanted to sell to a lot of those factories and things that came in here, like Enzyme, really early on. And so I think it was about money. And he just had an excuse because they insulted me. That's all he needed was an insult, right? But going back before the war, with the Carrolls here, another interesting thing is if you go to the county records, which I did, to find that ordinary, there was a men's temperance society headed by John Lately. And they went to the court, which they had a court like our county commission that was over county business and gave license and things out, and talked to them about not giving this ordinary license out anymore. So they stopped it for like 1 year. Then the next year, Mr. Woolcock, that had wholesale business next door and some docks out there, he got a license to sell at wholesale, like liquor. And then the following year, they just renamed it as a license to operate a place of private entertainment. And so everybody's getting their license back, and we are once again not alcohol free in Campbell County. It didn't last very long at all. So those are some of the most interesting things that you could find. But they were making a good living here, having church here, and then of course the war started. Now the Carrolls, we don't know what side they may have favored. Their children were really too young to fight. And her husband was 20 years older than his second wife, Madie Carroll. And she, their kids weren't very old, and he was ill. So there's nobody in the immediate family that joined up either side. But she had the church here, and they were operating the church. So after this event happened, the Confederates in Virginia didn't have enough troops to really hold their state. So what they did, they attacked things like the railroad that the North was using. They attacked different little recruitment camps, which we have one down here is why they came and attacked this one. They disrupted the activity of the North in this part of their state. And of course, West Virginia declared that they were wielding the real government of Virginia. And so that Richmond was, not, because they were rebelling. And so they came here to get this little recruitment camp out of Kanawha in November, and it was the 10th and 11th of 1861. Now, a lot of people talk about the flags. We've got one, a replica in the barn. The bars and, cross, the battle flag had not been adopted till later in the month, so it would have not flown here. And it was, of course, adopted. It never was the National Confederate flag. It was a flag, so they were shooting their own troops. Both sides were. Because across a field of battle with smoke going up, you couldn't tell the federal flag from the Confederate flag because both of them had stars in the corner and red and white stripes. So you couldn't see well enough, and so they decided, the South did, to adopt this other flag, which we know later the Klan picked up, and that's why it's got such a bad reputation. And that's the difference. But in Guyandotte at that time, they would have been flying a different flag that would have had Virginia on it. They ended up, I think it's with 11 states, and I think there were only like 7 or maybe been 9 here at the time of this battle. So the Confederates came in. General Jenkins' house was up here, and this was his hometown if you had a town, because they come down the river, visit Guyandotte. One of his brothers had a business here, and their plantation was on up at Greenbottom. And so they were insulting him because he had been our U.S. congressman from here. And so they were insulting him by setting up a recruitment camp in Guyandotte, which very, very much was Southern sympathizers for the most part. And they had a lot of Union people here, but most of them really sympathized with the South. So he came in and raided this recruitment camp. Now, the citizens it was on a Sunday, and it was his birthday, and the citizens of Guyandotte had done something unique they'd never done before. At church, after church, and we had a Methodist and a Baptist church, here at the time, and of course this Catholic church probably had nothing to do with this part. And they invited soldiers to dinner, which they hadn't done before, the Union soldiers. So they were spread out when Jenkins came. So it would almost appear as if they knew what was going to happen and they did it on purpose. And there were rumors citizens of Guyandotte fired on federal troops whenever this happened. So there was somewhere between 800 and 1,200 Confederates cavalry that came in here. The reason we don't know is we don't know how full the companies were. There were about 12 companies. And there was a Colonel Clarkson with him. And so they came down from the Barbersville and down this, here, went over and through the pickets, who were the only ones really stationed off the bridge, the Union pickets. Then they came in from this other area and came in the other side. and there was some battle going on here in the town. And then the next morning, they put them in several different houses. They had about close to 100 prisoners, few of them citizens of Guyandotte, and they put them in a prison and, well, in a house. They called that, now we call it the jail, the house, Mr. Keenan's house. And some other places like the hospital they were using, which still stands too. A hotel turned into a hospital during the war, and then back to a hotel. It was the Hiltbrunner Hospital, Union Hospital. So they were Union people. So they grabbed the son of Mr. Hiltbrunner, and he was one of the prisoners who went back. And they walked him. It took about 3 weeks to get into Virginia, where there was a railroad. They could put him in cars and take him to Libby Prison.